The horror genre is known for being full of cliches that can be seen across all of its movies. Most of the time, these cliches are going to be about a certain character type or a certain action that the characters have to take to get to a certain point in the story. One of these cliches is taking a decent horror movie and giving it a sequel that no one really wanted or needed. This can especially be seen with longer franchises that could have died years before they actually did. Well, today I just want to take a look at the flip side of that and look at horror movies that I think deserved a sequel that they never got. Will any of the movies that I talk about today actually get a sequel? Probably not, but I figured it could be fun to take a look at them anyway. Just a heads up now, there will be spoilers for pretty much every movie that I do talk about. Most of the movies I will talk about the ending and how they could possibly link to a sequel, so just a heads up there. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the first movie that I think deserved a sequel, that being Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods came out in 2011 and was a box office success. The story follows a group of friends going to their little cabin for a weekend getaway. Once we're there, we zoom out and see the whole property is being watched not by a killer but by two guys looking at a monitor.
Places, everyone. We are live.
Just to give some context, we end up learning that they are a part of a worldwide sacrificial ritual that has to be done every year in order to keep the world safe.
What's beneath us?
The ancient ones. The gods that used to rule the earth. As long as they accept our sacrifice, they remain below.
But instead of the main characters dying at the end and theoretically saving the world, we actually see them fight back against this secret organization that put them through everything they've been through in the movie so far. The movie finally ends after the facility that was holding all of these creatures finally falls and we see a giant hand burst through the ground, signifying that this is probably going to be the end. Although this movie can easily be left here, which it has been, there are a lot of different directions I think a potential sequel could go. For the style of movie, I really think it did deserve a sequel because it is able to balance horror as well with Sitterson and Hadley, the two engineers. We get a lot of comedy from it as well. On top of that, there are Easter eggs spread all throughout the movie showing different creatures we've seen possibly from other franchises, or even brand new monsters to attack the group. Like, it can almost be seen as like a reverse Avengers because you're finally getting all of these iconic horror villains into one area. Like, just imagine a follow-up where we do see the world essentially fighting for its life against all of these different creatures. And if we wanted to reverse time, we could possibly see a prequel maybe that looks more in-depth at the organization as a whole and how they operate from year to year. Like, how did Sitterson and Hadley end up there? How do they capture all the different creatures that they use every year? At one point, Sitterson mentions Japan having a perfect record.
Japan has a perfect record. We're number 2. We try harder.
How does Japan have a perfect record? Maybe we could take a look at what they do every year and the reason that they're successful every single time. Hell, even a movie just following Sitterson and Hadley could make for a great comedy. Again, will this movie actually get a sequel? Most likely not. I would be willing to bet though a few more years down the line we do get some sort of remake. Between balancing comedy and horror, I do feel like Cabin in the Woods could easily have a great sequel, but honestly I am fine with just having the first one. Another movie I think that could have had a great sequel is actually going to be a remake of a classic, and that's going to be the Friday the 13th remake from 2009. Although the Friday the 13th wiki does say Jason died at the end, let's just pretend he didn't. I mean, he does fly up through the boat dock at the end, even though I think it's just a reference to all the times it's been done before. Whether he died or not, I think it's safe to say that this was hands down the scariest portrayal we've had of Jason in the series so far. And with how agile and quick Jason moves throughout this movie, it's definitely unique compared to the slow, lumbering Jason we've seen in almost every installment before. I honestly think this Jason alone is enough for another movie in itself. And if they don't want to give us Jason in the Woods again, go back to the city. I mean, let's face it, Jason Takes Manhattan is a downright lie with that title because he's not in New York much at all. He spends most of the time on a boat getting there, and then when he is finally there, he's in either sewers or an alley. Imagine remake Jason chasing a group of people through the suburbs, picking up new weapons as he finds them. Not only does it fit this Jason, but it would be a whole new look at the character in general. I do know that sounds a little Halloween-y, but let's face it, Michael acts similar to Jason in those. Honestly, I think having this Jason alone for one more movie is enough to give it one last go. And it does seem that there were plans actually for a sequel to the 2009 remake. To celebrate a Friday the 13th back in 2023, writers Damian Shannon and Mark Swift actually revealed what the opening scene could have possibly looked like. They said the opening scene would have taken place in the forest, but during winter, and we would have seen Jason killing someone who was using a zip line. Hell, just the winter setting alone is enough of a change for Jason at this point. People have been asking to see Ghostface operate in the winter for years now, so why not Jason? A part of me is curious how the 2009 Jason would be in the older movies, because they are, again, two very different styles. I do think if they ever revisit the series, they would definitely need remake Jason to take the helm. And now to move on to the next movie, which for this I'm just going to consider an honorable mention, and that's going to be Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
You have to tell me. What happens to me?
Behind the Mask takes a look at horror movies from a completely different perspective. Here we actually get to see the behind the scenes of how a killer in a slasher movie operates. We meet Taylor, who's a journalist who's going to be making a documentary on the serial killer Leslie Vernon. In this world, killers from slasher movies are seen as historical figures who are real. We not only get to see how a serial killer would set up for all their killings, but also how they have to mentally be ahead of where their potential victims are.
In reality, aren't you talking about terrorizing innocent people?
No.
No. Why? Why is that funny?
Look, you came to me to find out how guys like Mike and Chucky and Freddy do what they do, not why.
And this movie uses a lot of cliches and tropes to get to that point. Although a sequel to this may be following a different killer is definitely possible because we could see their different MOs and how they operate, we do sort of get this premise in the movie Creep 2. Here we see a serial killer post an ad wanting to make a documentary about his life. The serial killer does reveal to the journalist what he's done, but she always has this cloud of uncertainty whether he's telling the truth or not. Earlier on, she downright denies it, and then that slowly builds up towards the end. Although I'm certain we'll never get a sequel for Behind the Mask, I think Creep 2 is how that sequel could have possibly looked. I do highly recommend taking a look at not only Behind the Mask, but Creep and Creep 2. Now let's go ahead and get back to the list and the next movie that I think really deserves a sequel. That being It Follows. It Follows was released in 2014 and uses a unique premise where the main villain is unseen for most of the movie. This causes our main protagonist Jay to second guess everything that she sees. And It Follows definitely leaves room for a sequel. Just look at the last scene when we see Jay and Paul walking down the street. Who is that back there? Is the entity coming back to haunt Paul or Jay? Possibly. Is it just a stranger walking behind them on the street? Also possible. A second It Follows movie could easily look at how Jay and her friends deal with fighting this entity again, or seeing a whole new group take a swing at it. And It Follows leaves the viewers with a lot of questions, especially about this curse. Where did it come from? Since it moves so slow, what happens if you just get on a plane and fly overseas? Can it possibly be trapped or contained? Is there a way to finally end the curse as a whole? While researching for this video, I actually found that It Follows does possibly have a sequel in the works under the name They Follow. It does seem to already have an IMDb page as well, but the only casted actor is Micah Monroe returning as Jay. So maybe some of these questions will be answered in a sequel if that does ever come out. A movie that has had no sequel mentioned and just seems very unlikely to get one is going to be Jordan Peele's Us from 2019. I think it's safe to say that based on Jordan Peele's first 3 movies, the dude can make a good movie. So why not let him revisit one of his previous works? Us essentially looks at cloning gone wrong. The government essentially had a failed cloning experiment, leaving an entire society essentially trapped underground, known as the Tethered. Now, Us actually ends with the Tethered not being fully victorious, but definitely on the way there. And with the twist ending revealing that Adelaide was actually one of the Tethered, I think that opens doors for multiple new stories. We know the government locked the Tethered away, so how would they deal with a potential takeover from their failed creation? Seeing how Adelaide was able to make the transformation when she swapped places as a child to a normal life, does that open up the question of can the Tether be saved? And if so, what sort of implications could that imply? Another interesting angle I think could be taken is that if the government had to come out with an announcement like this, you know there would be a split. Half the people would want to deal with it one way while the other half would be wanting to deal with it another. We could possibly get an explanation of more of the cloning experiments and what exactly went wrong and why they were being done in the first place. I feel like for Jordan Peele, a sequel of Us would have the perfect material for him to go back and cover. Now to move on to a movie that I don't think gets enough love, and that's going to be the clown classic Stitches from 2012. Stitches is sort of a horror comedy that follows a group of kids now grown up dealing with a killer clown who's back for revenge for what they had done to him years ago. Although this movie definitely does have its creepy aspects, especially considering the killer is a clown, there is plenty of dark humor spread all throughout this movie. On top of that, a lot of the kills are done using this clown gimmick, so it does make for a lot of unique deaths throughout.
Stop talking, big head.
For a sequel, they wouldn't even have to use Stitches himself. They could theoretically use a different clown that has a different personality and different style. And from the weird clown cult stuff we see throughout the movie, it seems like that definitely would be a possibility. The whole premise for Stitches is that he comes back because he was never able to finish his party. So I guess his soul is brought back through these custom eggs that each clown gets, which we actually see the sort of leader of the clowns piecing together Stitch's egg at the end of the movie, definitely hinting at a possible comeback. I don't think they originally planned on making this a sequel. I think they just wanted to leave the door open in case they wanted to revisit it. And who knows, Stitches definitely could make a comeback and try to finish the job he wasn't able to do. Although I'm not going to say it's the best horror movie out there, because it's not. It is definitely a fun watch and one that I wish they would bring back. Now let's turn the clock back a bit and look at one of the best horror movies that I think has ever been made, and that's going to be John Carpenter's The Thing. Now I know what some people might be thinking, doesn't it already technically have two sequels? While John Carpenter does consider Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness as a part of this Apocalypse trilogy, I really don't think The Thing got an actual sequel. And in my opinion, The Thing is one of the greatest slow burn mystery horror movies of all time. There is so much intentional uncertainty, not only for the characters, but the viewers as well, so we are right in their shoes with them the whole time. While The Thing didn't get a sequel, it did get a prequel in 2011, which definitely didn't get as much love. Now, it was cool to see how the events from the prequel linked up to the 1982 The Thing and where it crosses over at. I think a big reason the prequel gets so much hate is because of the god-awful CGI used all throughout it. The shots where they do use the practical effects look 100 times better. While the 2011 prequel didn't get as much love as the 1982 film, the director actually did have plans for a sequel. In an interview, he actually mentioned he wanted to continue the series by following Kate Lloyd, who was played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead in the prequel. He said at the end of the prequel, she would have actually been saved and brought to an oil rig near the South Pole. There, she would have tried to warn people about what had just happened, meanwhile a thing would have broken out on the rig. If this premise were greenlit, I think as long as they either would have upped the CGI or bring back more practical effects, they could have had a really solid shot at a sequel. Just playing off the fact that you're never 100% certain about what's really happening and fighting an alien life form, the story almost writes itself. Granted, the prequel does revisit a lot of the same scenes from the 1982 version as well as the one from the 50s. I know it had to visit a lot of the scenes from the 80s because they had to set up continuity between the movies, but with that being said, they would need to come up with some more original ideas and shots. For me, this type of story just has a way of pulling me all the way into it. Although I really don't think there's a shot at beating the 1982 one, I think a sequel to the prequel could actually stand a chance at being a decent movie. Like I said at the beginning of the video, will we actually see any of these get made? Well, as of now, it looks like one does have a chance, but the rest most likely not. Could it be fun to see these movies make a comeback? Definitely. Does it mean it would make for a great movie? That's not guaranteed. I do think it's just interesting to go back and take a look at all of the possibilities that could be explored with these movies. If there are any movies that you think should get a sequel, just drop them down below and let me know, but other than that, I think that's everything I got. Thanks.